Yes. Well, thank you kindly, Glima. Indeed, I am honored and happy to answer positively to this invitation. I must say that in the past year, we've had opportunities to speak to media about what's happening in Haiti, but so often it is difficult to say the essential in those interviews because there are certain keywords that are taboo in our so-called free society. And to me, when speaking about Haiti, truth must be spoken. It's part of the healing process for our people. So, indeed, in church, as the son of Episcopalian priest, who himself was the son of another Episcopalian priest, I was baptized Jean-Élie Saint Vil, which is the name of my grandfather. And I, growing up, trying to understand how our family came to carry that name, I ended up choosing Jafrikayiti to signify that I am a son of Africa born in Haiti. It is a privilege for me to be sitting on the west coast of Africa as we do this here. It wasn't planned that way, but our ancestors have a way of telling us that love is stronger than death. And that's why we are here today. And I am to speak to you about why more than 217 years after my first ancestors were crossing or were victorious, following hundreds of years of struggle on the island of Haiti, having been kidnapped from those shores of Western Africa, deported, tortured, made to work for other people, and to lose all of the fruits of their labor. And so today, I am here to speak about that story. And I think that has more to do with my identity than if I was to read to you what I have on LinkedIn and other biographies that I sometimes submit to people about where I have worked my 9 to 5. If you watch my website, you will see that much of what I publish has nothing to do with the formal training that I received from the University of Waterloo in biology. And as most African professionals who are what they call in the United States awakening, I don't say woke because I believe it's a process. We're always on a journey. We have double lives. Some of us have more than double lives. There is what we do to feed our family, and there is our obligation to our people, to our ancestors, those who struggle so we can be here. And so that's what I spend most of my awaken hours doing. And I've published a couple of audiobooks on Haitian history. And you'll notice that my website, it's called jafrikayiti.com, but you can also reach it by typing godisnotwhite.com. And, you know, I've adopted that website for a number of years now, precisely because I believe it is a core question to understand what is happening in Haiti today and what is happening on the planet today. Whiteness that has been elevated to holiness is actually the pandemic that we are facing on the planet for several centuries. And unfortunately, like I said, there are taboos that causes people to sidestep that issue. Someone the other day wrote that the problem with our teaching of the history of slavery is that we teach it as the history of Black people, but never as the history of white people. And so we need to use the words, deconstruct them, to understand them, and then to liberate ourselves from those ideas that have been created to create fear and misunderstanding among human beings. And so I always cause this trouble when people ask me to introduce myself because I always do something else. So here you go, Glima. You asked for it.
So
you are muted.
Yeah, whatever you'd like to say about Haiti, we are all ears. If you want to grab a glass of water, that's okay. But we'll listen to you. And then Yannick Lindquist was asked to comment, and everybody else can jump in afterwards.
Okay, thank you. And so it's the you cannot speak about Haiti without studying it in Africa. The Haitian population today is about 99% Africans. Very few people on the island do not have African DNA. How did this happen? Because we did not have Africans on the island in large numbers, except that although in Christopher Columbus's second voyage book, he actually says that the Arawak people who inhabited Haiti until the Europeans arrived told him that they were trading with Africans. And there's been discoveries of marijuana in Egypt that suggest that there's been connections between the Americas and Africa for several centuries. And now, people are knowing about the voyages of the king of Mali, who had taken voyages in the 1300s. However, this is not the African population or the roots of the African population that we see in Haiti today. The island had upwards of 1.5 million people when on December 5th, 1492, Christopher Columbus and a few other Europeans found refuge on the island. His boat, one of his boats collapsed, and the natives saved their lives only to be destroyed by the Spaniards. They were viciously massacred. First, some of them were taken as slaves to work on mining for gold, silver, and a beautiful people who organized themselves into 5 different kingdoms on the island, essentially disappeared. You'd be hard pressed to find Tainos or Arawak people on the whole island of Haiti today. And today Haiti is occupied 1/3 by the Republic of Haiti and 2/3 by the Dominican Republic. And of course, you will hear Dominicans who tell you that they are survivors of the Arawaks, but really when you go check the DNA, this is more myth than reality. There's very little Taino or Arawak DNA left on the island. It's true that on the eastern side, there's a little bit more, but it doesn't even, it gets to maybe 10% maximum. So the mixture that you have in the population on the island today is mostly African with African, because of course, people were taken from various nations of Africa. Today I'm sitting in Ivory Coast, and I can tell you I just look down the streets and all I see is people I could speak Creole to, but of course they won't understand what I'm saying because they speak another Malenke language. But it's the same, brothers and sisters. The family that was broken from all of the west coast of Africa, but even further down, Eastern Africa. And now with the DNA testing, people are realizing some nations they didn't even suspect were involved in this massive displacement, the most massive displacement of human beings that we've known. This, of course, started with religion. It is a pope, Pope Nicholas V, who issued a bull in 1455, inviting the Europeans, Christians, to go and kidnap Africans to enrich themselves. One of the first slave ships was called the Jesus of Lubeck. And it wasn't owned by some unknown person. It was the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth I, who entered in partnership with John Hawkins to go and kidnap Africans and accumulate capital, which capital is still visible at Buckingham Palace today. And so the depopulation of Africa is how Haiti became a Black nation. The Africans who were kidnapped today, they talk about 15 million having crossed the ocean, but really those numbers don't make any sense because really when you're talking about people who have crossed, you have to account for how many got drowned, got killed, disease, and then there is the numbers of generations born into slavery all over the Americas. And a few of them were also taken to Europe as enslaved people. What happened on the island of Haiti is significant. Within 50 years of the arrival of the Europeans, the population of 1.5 million Arawaks dwindled to insignificant numbers. The few who survived rushed by canoe to Borican Island, which today the Europeans renamed Puerto Rico. And as you'll see, they renamed everything after themselves. So the island that the Arawak people called Haiti, they dared to call it Hispaniola because it reminded them of Spain. But of course, Spain has to be bigger, so it's Little Spain. I will be poking jokes at white supremacy throughout this presentation because it's stupid. It is plain stupid. And in their arrogance, the people who propped up this concept still have not realized how much they have missed in humanity and how much they have caused others to miss for a very stupid concept. Now, the Africans on the island of Haiti were experiencing something that was quite different than those who were kidnapped and enslaved on neighboring territories. Not in terms of how they were treated, because there were no good colonizers. You know, sometimes I laugh because in Quebec, in Canada, sometimes there's this temptation to say that, well, in Quebec, we treated the natives better than, we don't care. Okay, there's no Academy Award being given for having killed less native people over a 10-year period type of thing. The reality is all of the colonies were established on white supremacy, which means working kidnapped individuals, including children, to death. The life expectancy of an 18-year-old well-built African was 7 years. 7 years. This means they had to increase the voyages to constantly be kidnapping new Africans. Now, the difference, though, is that Haiti was the only colony where the Europeans became so cocky that they became utterly stupid in terms of demographics. No other place did you have an African population that surpassed the European by so many factors. When the revolution broke, they usually time the revolution as the revolt of August 1791, but again, that's for the sake of conveniency, because the revolution all started from the time the Europeans attacked Africans and Africans fought back, and they never stopped fighting back. But in 1791, there were 450,000 Africans enslaved on that small island, with 20,000 whites, an intermediary class they call affranchis or freed people of color, who were around between 20 and 30,000. And the racial hierarchy had one element that could not be violated: thou shalt not enslave a white person. Everybody else is fair game. And in theory, an African could enslave a mulatto, or what they call the Quateron, which is, because again, the folly of white supremacy was that white was the unity, the unit, right? So a human, a full human, is a white person. If you only have half a white person in you, it's the middle, so it's half, mulatto. If you have 3/4 of white in you, you're almost good. So they call you a Quateron. Of course, all of these things were not trivial terms. They used them to give different oppressed people privileges that come to define them. Because if you're a Quateron, there are clothing that you can wear that a mulatto cannot wear, and certainly a black person cannot wear. Even the food rations were discriminated. So an African enslaved born on the island was given privileges that a newly arrived kidnapped African didn't have. So you had frustrations created at all levels in that society. And these fools thought that they could keep this going forever, because as the oppressed people are fighting among themselves, they can just stay in the big house and watch the show, play violin, do science and technology, and and many discoveries happen during that period of time. And that's why when you open your science books, most of the scientists are Europeans, because at the time they didn't need to do the cooking, they didn't need to do anything. They just sat in the big house, they did literature. And so, in fact, in France, they call this period le siècle des Lumières, the Enlightenment period. And when you read what some of these Enlightenment period geniuses were saying, like Voltaire and others, you have to ask yourself, someone needs to turn on the real light, because these folks are in deep darkness. But that's not the object of our discussion here. What I'm trying to say is that this barbaric system would have maintained itself if they didn't become so careless. Because what happened is that not only were the Europeans outnumbered by people who were not slaves. It's forgotten that the people who were kidnapped were doctors, food producers, teachers, some of them inventors who from one moment to the next become dehumanized and being called a slave and treated as if stupid and everything. And so what happened is that the Africans benefited from the fact that the Europeans were fighting among themselves. Just the island of Haiti had the British, the French, and the Spanish fighting over small pieces of the island. Of course, there was a very good reason for that, because Haiti alone, by the way the French were using the slave labor, was more prosperous than all 15 British colonies of the Americas. Of course, they maintained that because the strategy they used was to work the Africans to death and then constantly import new young Africans. And in that same strategy lied the recipe for disaster. Disaster from the European perspective, liberation from the African perspective. Because what happened, the fighting that was happening in Europe between the British, the Spanish, and the French started to involve the Africans. The Africans were fighting with whatever they had in terms of spears and poison, anything they could use to attempt liberating themselves. But once you got a general, Toussaint Louverture, who offered his services to the French army in order to fight the Spanish on that same island, then his troops became trained in using the same weapons that the Europeans were using. And remember, the whole thing sat on the idea that 20,000 whites could count on rapid intervention of the militaries of France, Spain, Britain, and then later on the United States, if ever the Africans revolt. Well, the Africans did revolt, and several times. For instance, in around 1794 or 95, the French called on the British army to come and save them. Because they didn't want to call on the French, because just like the British in the United States, they wanted to keep La Métropole, or the motherland, as far away as their money as possible, so that they don't get taxed. And so instead of calling on the French to help them, and of course, because the British were closer, because the British had stolen the island of Jamaica by that time. And so, and the other day I was laughing because a former Prime Minister of Canada was boasting about General John Simcoe, who supposedly was a hero, an abolitionist in Canada. And when you go and you read the facts about John Simcoe, the fool was actually enlisted in the British army to go fight real abolitionists on the island of Haiti. And of course, he got his ass bitten by the Africans and went to England in shame. I do this parenthesis on purpose because my point is that we still haven't written the true history of our realities as Europeans, as Africans, who have lived this vicious encounter and whose ramifications we are still living today. And so fake heroes have been created throughout the colonizing world, whether it is Victor Schlossler, I've mentioned John Simcoe, William Wilberforce, for instance, who is deemed an abolitionist hero. When you go and you read what he said in 1807, the same year that this law was passed that is attributed to him, and that's why he's called a big hero, he said that you should not free the Africans right away. To do so would mean ruining both the Europeans and the Africans. You need to gradually train them into freedom. This is not an abolitionist. That's a businessman. That's a businessman who realized that, listen, there has just been a successful slave revolt in Haiti. These people slaughtered the Europeans. If we don't get smart, we will also get slaughtered. And if we pretend to take a moral high ground, we can now decree that we're going to collect 100 pounds per head of African that we capture on the ocean and further enrich ourselves. That's what they did. There was no abolition of slavery by the British. There was simply a transition from one way of exploiting the Africans to another way of continuing the same exploitation. And that's why, to this day,
we're waiting for our guest speaker to pop in again, but I don't know if anyone wants to jump in the meantime. Yannick, do you want to, I don't want to push you, but if you have anything to say, or anyone else for that matter. Oh, Nikki, I think you're on.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
he's back.
I don't know if that was,
sorry.
I don't
Nikki,
know
he's
if that was a commercial or if it's a British guy who controls the internet in Ivory Coast, but I'm back. So anyways, what I simply was closing on here is that the story about how slavery ended in the Americas, depending on which book that you are picking up, you might be reading a whole lot of falsehoods that have nothing to do with reality, because the math is not complicated. 1804 comes at least 3 years before 1807, when William Wilberforce passed this law that abolished not slavery, but the slave trade. Precisely because they wanted to collect money on the ocean and continue to enrich the same families on the heads of Africans. Meanwhile, on the island of Haiti, where Africans revolted and managed to get rid of the Spanish, the British. There were 55,000 British soldiers who died trying to enslave Africans on the island of Haiti. And the French, the army of Napoleon Bonaparte. And it's funny because white supremacy, like I said, has nothing scientific about it, but rather the opposite is very plainly stupid. Many so-called historians trying to, I guess, deal with the fact that these revolted Africans beat Napoleon Bonaparte, who was always heralded as some kind of hero, you know, great general and blah, blah, blah. So they don't want to admit this is what happened. So they come up with some kind of story that yellow fever, that's why. I don't know, they must have, they should have taken steps to stop Africans from going to universities. But when I studied biology at University of Waterloo, no one taught me that yellow fever was a genetic disease that affects only Black people. I mean, the soldiers of the army of the Africans could have gotten yellow fever just like the Europeans got yellow fever. No, they beat the Europeans, okay? And the reason why they beat them is because they were fighting for something sacred. They weren't fighting to steal another mine of gold. They were fighting to survive because they saw how many generations of Africans were slaughtered and that there was no way of negotiating with white supremacy, because the predecessor of Dessalines tried that, Toussaint Louverture. And that's why in most of the history books written by Europeans, you will see the name of Toussaint Louverture, but they don't talk about Dessalines. Dessalines is deemed to be warlike. Whenever you see that word warlike in European books, it means that they met natives who fought back and beat them. That's what it means. I mean, how can you leave your territory, which is in Europe, with boats that are armed to the teeth and go and attack people who never did a thing to you? You kill their kings, you rape their women, and you say they are warlike when they fight back. And this, stays on for generations. You have university professors saying stupidities like that in 2021. And that's the problem with Haiti. Haiti is a mirror that disturbs, because Haiti refuses to show to white supremacy that pretty face that it had invented for itself, that fake face that doesn't exist anywhere. Haiti is a mirror that disturbs, because it's a true mirror. What we need to remember is that when Pope Nicholas V issued that papal bull in 1455, the pretense was that the Europeans had a closeness to some entity called God, who happens to look exactly like them, that they're going to share with the world because the world doesn't have access to that so-called God. Meanwhile, their behavior is everything counter to those 10 commandments that they claim to have adopted. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not, all kinds of niceties which were completely abandoned for profit. Some of the people who arrived in the Americas were not the finest Europeans, as some of you know. Some of them were actually sent there as prison folks. It wasn't the best specimen that arrived. But some of them enriched themselves very quickly and returned to Europe with new titles because they have amassed money with the blood of Africans. And so when Haiti declared its independence, General Jean-Jacques Dessalines did not create a black supremacist state. To the contrary, he welcomed thousands of people from Poland who arrived on the island as members of Napoleon's army of enslavers. And when those Polish military men saw that the Africans were winning the war and that it made more sense strategically for them to side with the Africans, that's what they did. And the Africans welcomed them. And in the first constitution of Haiti, promulgated in May 1805, it is the very first constitution in our knowledge where it is specifically stated that religious freedom is guaranteed. It states that the empire of Haiti does not have a chosen religion, and that everybody is free to practice whatever religion of their liking. At the same period, in Europe, whether it is in France, you had to be Catholic in order to be worthy. In England, you had to be Anglican, etc. So those values were established by the Africans because the Africans created an empire on the principle of tout moun c'est moun. Every human is human. And that's why in the Articles 12, 13, and 14, the Africans took great pains to say how from this day on, this nonsense of calling some of us mulattoes, Quateron, and white is abolished. Every Haitian is Black, including the Polish with green eyes, the Germans who were accepted as Haitians, and Americans who were also accepted as Haitians. Black did not mean your skin color. It meant that you are a citizen of this nation that abolishes slavery forever. And so it was decreed that any of the Tainos who had survived, or the Arawak people, the first peoples of the island, who would land on setting foot on the island, they automatically become free if they were enslaved and a citizen of the nation of Haiti. And Dessalines went further. After this 12-year war, the nation is bankrupt. 3 of every 5 African men has been killed. And so Haitians sometimes like to talk about the victory, but really the wounds are deep, numerous, and they are still festering. And that's what the second part of this talk will be about. This nation ruined, the leader decides that he's going to offer $40 for every US slave ship captain who brings a person on the Haitian shore. And automatically upon arrival, this person is freed and becomes a Haitian citizen. And many US slavers collected that $40 per head bounty. Dessalines offered help to Miranda, who went on to liberate several countries in Latin America, and his successors continued that principle later on after his assassination. But it's not all beautiful. The Africans fought the Europeans, they won, and they live happily ever after. It doesn't work that way. There are no angels on the island, only human beings. And so the light-skinned Haitians, those who were called mulattoes and thought that they were superior to the rest, got infected by the virus and started to believe that now that the Europeans are left, we must be the masters of that prosperous territory. And they went and sought and found the collaboration of the Europeans, and particularly the French, who offered them that France will recognize Haiti's independence, but they need to accept a different model of the racial hierarchy, except that there will be a different division of labor or power. The mulattoes will maintain political power. The Europeans would come back as merchants and occupy the business of Haiti, commerce. And they accepted the fools. And whenever the Africans try to revolt, the strategy is to go find some old Black general, as old as possible, you know, like in the late 80s, and name him president, put him in a national palace, wait for him to die. While the real power brokers, the mulatto, the light skin, stay behind and run the business of the country. Essentially, this is the model that is in place today. The assassination of the latest fool that you hear a whole lot about is nothing but a black-faced puppet who got retired and was not informed that his expiry date was decided in Washington, D.C. That's all it was. There's no deep analysis that needs to be made for the fact that a so-called president is in his house with his wife, surrounded by bodyguards, and he gets taken down in his own living room. And to this day, these fools are trying to convince us that they don't know how it happened. Yet we sent rockets to the moon and they came back. Obviously, this was yet another case of the white supremacist United States deciding for the Haitian people who shall be the full named president, prime minister, while a nation who fought so courageously for dignity is denied human brotherhood. Because that's what's happening. When you see those thousands of people take this treacherous trip from Brazil, Bolivia, Colombia, some of them get killed crossing the Amazon jungle, facing animals we don't have on the island, that they've faced for the first time with their children, their toddlers in their hands. They're not doing that for adventure. They're doing that because the United States of America, because France, because Canada have conspired to light a fire in their house. And it is shameful that in 2021, those of us like me who is allowed in the big house of the man is offered complicity in silence as an option. Not only do I reject that offer, but I spit on the fools who make such an odious offer. Too many African men and women have died for our dignity, to allow us to be afraid to speak truth. And when I speak about truth here, about what's happening in Haiti, I am not in the abstract. The meeting that was organized to kidnap the last real Haitian president happened in my city. It was January 31st, February 1st, 2003. A handful of white idiots. I do not apologize for the choice of word because their behavior was idiotic. Not a single Haitian in the room. Yet, the foreign ministers from France, the Minister for la Francophonie, Denis Paradis, who convened the meeting, and all these other fools who were there, decided that Haiti must be put under UN tutelage. The president of Haiti must be exiled, and they will put a new army and a new police force in Haiti. This meeting was reported in the news media in Canada, namely in L'Actualité, a French-speaking language magazine in Quebec. About a month after the meeting, in February 2003. Despite that, okay, they went on with the plan. And on February 29th, 2004, which is the bicentennial of the end of racial slavery on the island, when Haitians and Africans and people of goodwill around the world were supposed to be celebrating humanity's victory when these Africans liberated themselves, instead, white soldiers under the leadership of the CIA, with their white cousins from France and Canada, entered the residence of the president at night when thieves operate, kidnapped him and his wife, and separated them from their two little children and took them to Africa. That was under the applause of the 15 white families in Haiti who control the economy, who were very happy with this back to Africa shipping of the president, who committed the crime of increasing the minimum wage, who committed the crime of investing 16% of the national budget in healthcare, who committed the crime of establishing a university in Haiti where the children of peasants were becoming medical doctors for the first time in Haitian history. And so they replaced 7,000 elected officials with some of the most vile criminals we have on the island. And they gave them titles, president, prime minister, all of them established without proper procedure respecting the Haitian constitution. And so what happened? Well, what could happen? What would happen if you went in the jail in the United States and you took the most vicious criminals that you have and you established them as president of the United States in Washington, as governor of New York, as New York is looking for a new governor now, you know? What would happen? Your society would crumble. Well, that's what happened in Haiti. It's not rocket science, it was predictable. And so when the earthquake happened in 2010, Haiti did not have a government to respond because the government was collapsed, kidnapped by the CIA and the white supremacist fools who met in Gatineau, deciding upon themselves what should happen in Haiti. And they used the United Nations, which is supposed to be an organization that serves humanity, and they put it to the service of their crime. Because when the armies of the United States, France, Canada, and Chile and others invaded the country on February 29, 2004, only a few months later, they managed to get UN troops now to come to give a cover of international cooperation. They're here now to help Haiti get stability. So they overthrow the stable legal government, and now they call UN troops coming from Jordan, coming from countries that are themselves in deep trouble with no practice of democracy. Now these fools are parading the streets of Haiti. You had soldiers from Brazil, one of the most racist places on earth, with its large African population and indigenous population. Brazil is one of the most vicious places where the army is routinely sent in the impoverished neighborhoods to harass Black Brazilians. And what did they do in Haiti? The same thing they do to the Africans of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. And this was predictable. They raped women, they killed children, they raped little boys, and then they left. Before leaving in 2010, October, they contaminated one of the most important water sources in Haiti, the Artibonite River, with cholera. Cholera, which we did not have in Haiti. And as I speak to you today, the 20th of October, 2021, the United Nations, guilty of this crime against humanity, has not paid $1 in reparation to the survivors or the families of the victims. And so that's what Haitians are running away from. That's why they are in Mexico. They're trying to cross into the United States. They're trying to cross into Canada. And they're looking for a place to live on planet Earth. and they're looking for you. I'll end with a positive note. I mentioned the fools like William Wilberforce, John Simcoe. I could mention Sontonax, who were members of La Société des Amis des Noirs, which was a club of white people who wanted to give themselves good conscience and claim that they were the friends of the blacks. And they were very militant during the time of enslavement, saying that they want to pressure their respective governments to give an extra day of rest to the enslaved Africans. And they fought very highly of themselves and applauded each other for their militancy. You know, they raised money for their cause, etc. Thankfully, this is not the only type of fools we had at that time. In the United States of America, the same United States of America that used the labor of Africans as cannon fodder in the wars in Savannah, Georgia, so that they could liberate themselves, just like happened in the so-called Second World War. Many Africans lost their lives in Europe to liberate the European cities, only to be denied what is owed to them for their service in fighting that criminal Adolf Hitler. In Africa, they know them as les tirailleurs sénégalais. Even their pension was denied to them. Well, we are thankful that these are not the only types of people that inhabit the United States. There stood a man whose name was John Brown. They've written all kinds of stuff about him. But what I note is that this white man was not advocating for an extra day of rest for the enslaved. He was not advocating for slavery light. He was advocating for what any good Christian, if such a thing existed, would have fought for. He saddled his horse with white men, black men, and fought with arms in his hands against the white supremacist army of the government of the United States of America. When he was kidnapped by those criminals, they pretended to have judged him. Yeah, right. Just like they've judged all of these Africans that they've murdered from the time they've kidnapped them from the shores of Africa. They've judged Emmett Till, they've judged all kinds of people. They've judged our brother who was killed a couple of years ago, who became famous, saying that he cannot breathe, as if he was the first one who could not breathe. As if the people in New Orleans who saw the army of their own government shooting at them because they were looking for water, they were looking for food. And the same people who read in their Bible, I was thirsty and you gave me water, I was naked and you clothed me, were holding guns at these black people in New Orleans, in their own country. Weren't they Americans? And that's why I'm telling you that these Haitians are not being mistreated by those horses. It's not the horses who are the animals. The real animals are sitting on the horses because they cannot find their reflection in the faces of these
Nikki, feel free to jump in. I know I'm putting a lot of pressure on you, sorry. And if he comes back, you sort of like go back. But
well, I wanted to speak to the, I wanted to give a brief account of what had happened to the migrants, actually, that he was started to talk about, the migrants in Del Rio, Texas there, after the whole world watched in disbelief the inhuman condition and treatment that they were subjected to, including the pregnant women and the children under the bridge in blazing desert heat. So do you want me to talk about it now? And then, because that's really when you mention, because to me it was important that we find out what had happened to them. So yeah, so I even though it's interesting, he mentioned as far as the agents there who were on horses and with a whip. So what it's been reported now that the administration had prompted to launch an investigation into the events and that were captured. Alejandro Mayorkas, which is the Secretary of Homeland Security, stated that the agents involved have been assigned to administrative duties, and they're not interacting with migrants anymore, which is good. But I think he had Mr. Saint Vil. Has he come back? Because I wanted to thank him for such. Has he come back yet or no?
Yes,
He has.
yes.
Okay. For such, he had touched upon what caused the surge when it came to the migrants, and so I know many Haitians immigrated to South America at that time and during the earthquake, and one of the first places that they went to, many of them went to Brazil, and at that time there was with the preparation of the 2014 FIFA World Cup and 2016 the Summer Olympic. So they were offered promising job prospect there. But of course, we all know with COVID-19, so there were it was the employment opportunities were difficult, and countries in the regions actually closed their borders. So, and Chile was also one of the top Latin American destinations for Haitian migrants. And now there's restricted new immigration laws. So as a result, should I continue, or should we have Mr. Saint Vil finish up?
As you wish, Jean. Do you want Nikki to finish
No,
up?
I think actually that's a good way to transition, and then we can continue that conversation like that. Yes.
Okay. All right.
I'm listening to Yannick.
Okay. Yes, I want to, first of all, I want to say that it was such an informative Haiti, which was called La Perle des Antilles, the Pearl of the Antilles. It's just such an informative conversation that we were having. I really thank you. But again, as I was continuing, as a result of that, so we have approximately 19,000 migrants, primarily Haitians, that begin this dangerous journey, as Mr. Saint Vil was talking about, congregating in camps, waiting to cross the US border. Mm-hmm. Now, at this point, Mr. Mayorkas has reported, and it's very confusing as far as the numbers. We don't really know what happened, everything that happened, but he had mentioned that they had cleared the encampment underneath the bridge. 8,000 migrants were returned to Mexico, he said. 5,000 had remained in the country. Their requests for asylum are being evaluated by US immigration. And he said on a case-by-case basis to determine whether they can be safely returned to Haiti. So that's what he said, or whether they have a medical condition that placed them at too great risk. And and approximately 5,500 have been sent to Haiti on using Title 42, which is the emergency public health initiated by Donald Trump, allowing immediate expulsion of migrants without considering their asylum claims, which is usually required by US laws. And the Biden administration had continued to uphold Title 42. So that's why we have, now we have all those migrants who are back to Haiti in such dire condition that we are in. And also, this also has led Daniel Foote, the US Special Envoy to Haiti, to resign over what he called the inhumane and counterproductive decision to deport the migrants under these circumstances. So now what happened to the returning migrants? There's no evidence that they have been persecuted by the government, but we also know that there are armed robberies, kidnapping for ransom, and that are occurring daily. And so therefore, and that type of kidnapping has touched all social layers of society, not just everyone involved, even the vendors. Everybody has been. No one is safe in Haiti, has been kidnapped. So it's even though they're not being persecuted, but you have to wonder. I think the instability that we already have in Haiti now adding to all those people who are not working. So it's a very dire situation here in Haiti, and no one is safe. So that's basically what I have. I just wanted to touch upon what had happened to the migrants, and so yeah, so that's it.
John, do you want me to gather questions, or do you want to reply to Nikki? Would anyone else have questions?
Well, I want to do a quick conclusion.
Yes, please do.
Specifically building on the situation of the refugees. These folks are not migrants; they are refugees. And if they were white, everybody would understand that they are refugees. One thing that I'd like to mention with regards to the timing, yes, there was an increase in 2010, but it had nothing to do with the earthquake. The earthquake is being used as a scapegoat. What Haitians have been running away from is an occupation force that landed in Haiti in 2004 and established a neo-Tonton Macoute regime, a regime just like the Duvaliers, okay? You had people like Michel Martelly, who was a card-carrying Tonton Macoute. The Haitian people did not choose him. And I'm glad that Yannick mentioned Daniel Foote. One of the things that made Daniel Foote a celebrity in Haiti a couple of weeks ago is that for the first time, we had a US diplomat sent to Haiti as a special envoy saying point blank that it is the United States that chose Michel Martelly as president, as puppet president, and it is the United States that did the same thing with Jovenel Moïse. He did not continue on to tell you some of the sordid details that Haitians know about the fact that Michel Martelly established a narco regime. The gang violence that we have today, and that's the second point I wanted to make, it does not affect everybody. That's again another thing that's coming in the media with buzzwords, but the facts do not support that, because something very nefarious is happening in Haiti. People are kidnapping folks and asking $1 million ransom, yet they are not kidnapping a single millionaire, and they exist in Haiti. They're very visible because they don't look like the rest of the population. But they haven't kidnapped. This kidnapping spree did not start in 2021. Any Haitian who is on this conversation here can name folks that they know was kidnapped last month, the month before. And all of them are middle-class folks or poor people. The reason being is that what's happening is not kidnapping for monetary gain. There's something even more vicious that's happening. There are 15 families in Haiti who control the import and export business. That's where the weapons are coming in. That's where the tomato paste is coming in. And all of this is, these are privatized because the United States demanded that Haiti follow the structural adjustment program, where the state has nothing. Everything is in the hands of a so-called private sector, but the private sector is non-Haitian. The richest man in Haiti, his name is Gilbert Bijou. He is the representative of Israel in Haiti. He's not Haitian, he's not Black, and he's not the only one. If you look at the names of the folks who are in the Pandora Papers, they're all white. And it's not a coincidence. It's just like the colonial system had 20,000 whites who relied on the militaries of France, Spain, etc. And the neo-colonial system is a copy of the colonial system. So kidnapping does not affect everybody in Haiti. The folks who import the weapons do not get kidnapped. It's weird. If you're doing kidnappings, you should be kidnapping millionaires. It has not happened in Haiti. That's a very important cue. And so my conclusion is that what we are dealing with in Haiti is not just a humanitarian crisis that calls on us to be good citizens of the world. It calls on us to be allies in the example of John Brown. When John Brown was captured and killed by the United States government, the government of Haiti in 1859 decreed 3 days of mourning, and the impoverished people of Haiti collected $20,000 and sent to the widow of John Brown. That's what friends do. That's what brothers and sisters do. Today, what's happening in Haiti is not a call for the US military to enter Haiti. It's the opposite. It's for the United States to stop sending its weapons to criminals that they put in power, so that the people of Haiti can choose leadership, like the president who was kidnapped and kept in exile in South Africa, and who, when he returned in 2011, reopened the only medical school that impoverished people had access to. And from 2011 to today, over 1,000 doctors, lawyers, engineers have graduated. And so the solution is not gonna be Tarzan showing up and saving the natives from themselves. It's the opposite. It's the Africans who are going to choose their own leadership, or they're going to be dying trying to do so. And people who live in the United States, Canada, and Europe have a choice. You can either be allies or you can be hypocrites. I demand that you choose to be allies like John Brown.
I'll open the floor for very quick questions. If you don't mind, just keeping your questions to 30 seconds, and then we'll gather up all the questions and then Jean can reply. Hopefully that would work out.
I wanted to ask Jean to mention the idea, the 1915 occupation of Haiti. Could you say something about that? I am proud to say that my grandfather was a member of the CACO, who had fought against the American occupation there. He was injured, he got shot, but fortunately that he survived. So would you please say a few things about the occupation?
We'll try to gather as many questions as there's anyone else that has a question. Maybe just pop your hand up under reactions or speak up. Go ahead. Yes, James? Oh, you're muted still, James.
I have a question. I enjoyed your talk, but I have a question because I'm a little confused. You said as today, 99% of the people on the island of Haiti are not Haitians, that they're Africans, and that 1/3 of the Haitians are of the Republic of Haiti. In terms of numbers, how many people is that? A couple 100,000? A million? What would 1/3 of Haiti be today?
Yeah, so the confusion comes from the terms. Haiti is the name of the island. So now they renamed the island Hispaniola. That's what the Spanish did. But the real name of the island, what the first people called it and what we Haitians call it, is Haiti. So 1/3 is the Republic of Haiti, and the 2/3 is the Dominican Republic. On the Haitian side, on the 1/3 side, the population is 99% African. When I say 99% African, that means they are the descendants of Africans who were kidnapped and displaced. Okay, but you have other populations there, such as people who arrive as refugees from Israel during the Second World War. You also have Lebanese who created their own communities, and they are, unfortunately, a number of them allied with the US Embassy to do all kinds of coup d'etat and stuff like that.
Thank you.
I'll ask Marie. Nadine, you have a question?
Sorry, hi. Yeah, my question, I asked it in the chat. Could you can read it on the chat. Can you see it?
Yes, she asks to both presenters, will Fanmi Lavalas stop the exodus and the violence in Haiti?
So should I go with those two questions then?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so first comment with regards to the 1915 US occupation. So the United States Army, after having been involved behind the scenes for several years, in actually 1914, entered Haiti and took its gold reserve, and with that money, created the National City Bank in New York. And that money never returned to Haiti. The year after, they invaded Haiti and basically put the country under tutelage, took over the army, and they pretended to leave in 1934. I say they pretended to leave because when they left, they put puppet presidents in power, and basically there was a so-called Haitian army created, where almost everything about the army was controlled from Washington. So that 1915 to 1934 occupation, was resisted by Haitians, because of course Haitians were very proud of the fact that we created this oasis of freedom in the area, and despite the attempts of France, Spain, England, they never managed to take the island again from us. So that US occupation was, and on top of it, the US soldiers were Southerners who did not have any qualms with. In fact, there are some publications that talk about how these guys, they considered themselves better equipped to put the niggers in their place. That's how they said it. So, yeah, the second question has to do with Famille Lavalas. Famille Lavalas is the political party led by Dr. Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who is in the modern era, the only president you can really say was chosen by the Haitian people. That election happened in 1990. They claim it was 67% of the population who voted for him. Haitians don't care what the numbers say. They know that he was chosen. He's a former Catholic priest who evolved in the liberation theology movement, the first liberation theologian to become head of state. He lasted 7 months. The CIA army that I mentioned was established after the 1915 occupation, was mobilized to kidnap him. After 3 years in exile, Bill Clinton pretended that he was returning democracy when President Aristide returned with 20,000 US soldiers in 1914. But the negotiation was that he has to pretend, and the Haitian people who elected him for a mandate of 5 years had to pretend that the 3 years he spent in exile, he was still president. And according to the Haitian constitution, you cannot have 2 consecutive terms. So by the time they returned him, he had to organize election for someone else to replace him. And so he had his second term, because according to the Haitian constitution, you can have 1 more term. So he went into the election in 2000. He won by a large margin. I remind you that 2000 is the same year that there was a very peculiar election in Florida. The guy whose brother made him president said that he felt so presidential that he doesn't agree that the Haitian people had a good election in Haiti. So the world, the free world, accepted George Bush as president, George Bush the Lesser, but they denied President Jean-Bertrand Aristide having been elected. And Famille Lavalas was banned after the president was kidnapped in 2004 and sent to exile in Africa. And to this day, the Haitian people are trying to establish that party, which is the most popular in Haiti, but which is also the most hated by the white supremacist apparatus, represented by an informal group called the Core Group in Haiti. This is something you'll never hear in other countries, but in Haiti, there is a syndicate of the embassies. So the ambassador of the United States, Canada, France, Spain, Germany, they form a group called the Core Group, and they name themselves the Friends of Haiti, self-appointed. Haiti doesn't have a say in that. They decide, so for instance, at a time when the last puppet was killed, Jovenel Moïse, they're the ones who decided, who sent a tweet and said, this guy is now Prime Minister of Haiti. And so that's what we're trying to do right now, okay? To get out of this ridiculous predicament where people who are not intelligent, but who think that they are more intelligent than everybody else, sitting in Washington, Paris, and Ottawa, deciding the future of their fellow human beings in Haiti. And so Famille Lavalas is, as far as I'm concerned, central to the solution, because it's not just a question of the actual political party. Remember the numbers that I've just quoted you. That president and his wife, who was kept in exile in South Africa, managed during the time he was there to polish his higher education, get his doctorate from one of the best universities in South Africa. he and his wife, who is a lawyer, reopened the university. So he won against the white supremacists in the court of law, reopened his university. The university was turned into an army barrack during the years that he was in exile. They had access to the whole island, and they chased out the students. Some of them finished their education in Cuba because Aristide had renewed diplomatic relationships with Cuba. And so now President Aristide, from the time that he returned in 2011, reopened the university, and you have now thousands of doctors, lawyers, very dangerous Black people who are being trained. And that's why the CIA considers them a threat. Because if you get all of these educated Black people in Haiti, living in Haiti, they're going to establish that the priority of Haiti is not to make the island comfortable for the multinational companies, but rather to invest in having drinking water for the average person, literacy, healthcare, all of the things that in modern society everybody else take for granted. Having a government that protects you in a time of pandemic is not a luxury. It's a necessity. Today, there's not a fool in Haiti who's being called prime minister, minister, this and that, who can take any sensible decision, whether it is about vaccination, quarantine. They can't, because they are not chosen by the people. The people don't consider them anything other than stooges of Washington, D.C., because that's what they are.
Jean, I think we've run out of time and we're really pushing you. It's midnight for you, is it not? In Côte d'Ivoire?
I have all of death to rest.
Well, I want to thank you so much for enlightening us. If anyone want to do more reading, there's a list that came with the invitation, so please go ahead. Jean recommends the writings of Edwige Danticat, who's a fellow Miamian, very well-known journalist. So go ahead and read her stuff. Does anyone have any last-minute questions that you must have answered by Jean?
No question, but just an unbelievable presentation. Very informative. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bravissimo.
Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate the fact that you, Glima, insisted on getting this organized. You invited me so early on. Appreciate the professionalism. And it's not a trivial thing when people like you take the time to have these difficult conversations. One of my most difficult thing to deal with is how complacent Black people have become, especially well-off Black people. Today we are crying for Colin Powell, yet Colin Powell was a privileged criminal.
Exactly.
The people who deserve our sympathy, we don't talk about. We are in the big house for a purpose, not to be comfortable, but to recognize that what made the difference between me staying in Haiti and dying in one of the most impoverished neighborhoods versus me getting on a plane and getting higher education and traveling all around the world has nothing to do with qualities that I or my parents had. It's a privilege. It's just an offer that we have, and therefore we have to use our privilege and commit class suicide, race suicide, in order to fully live our lives. So thank you, Glima, and all of you beautiful people for the time we spent together. Aibobo.
Thank you.
Safe travels home.
I am home already.
Yeah, of course, that's true. You said that, didn't you? Take care,
Yes,
everyone.
but
Have a
thank you.
nice night. We are going to have this recorded available on the UUMiami site. Thank you.